The demands by the prosecution have been for the maximum penalty, and I understand that under Egyptian law that can be between 15 and 25 years of detention.
And in trials of this nature, since President Morsi was overthrown last July, have prosecutors been getting the maximum sentences when they demand them?
Well, if we look at what happened in the parallel trials against the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, we have seen some draconian verdicts being passed of hundreds of death penalties being imposed on the defendants. So the prosecution's demand is in that sense coherent and consistent with what they have been doing in the other crackdown on political actors in the country. What makes this exceptional, of course, is the fact that it involves journalists and not least foreign journalists as well, and that may of course have some influence in how this trial will proceed. I mean, it comes on the back of the announcement that former Field Marshal al-Sisi has won the election, so that raises a number of questions. First of all, the trial also dragged on until after the election of the former military leader. So one thing that is interesting to watch is whether the defense will get the same time to make their case as the prosecution, whether indeed the judges will also feel a need to impose a similar strict verdict, or whether there is going to be some indication that now al-Sisi has been elected and will be inaugurated soon as the next president of Egypt, whether he feels secure enough to maybe allow some leniency. And I think he also is very sensitive to the impact it is going to have outside of Egypt, not least, of course, in regards to securing foreign aid for Egypt's ailing economy.
So you would say that there's quite a bit of uncertainty about how independent of the military-installed government this court case would be?
Yes, so far we have seen, of course, that the judiciary was very much of a very similar opinion as the interim government, that the Muslim Brotherhood constituted a big danger to the stability of the country, and that also certain elements within the press were regarded with a great deal of suspicion by the government and have been dealt with rather mercilessly. So let's see what happens now that there is a new government and probably basically an entirely new regime being put in place, and what kind of an impact this is going to have on not only on the political scene in Egypt but also wider issues of press freedom.
Now, what do you think of the evidence that was presented against Peter Greste and the other Al-Jazeera employees accused of aiding the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah, it's very difficult to ascertain any of that. Defense team of the journalist has also complained that they had very little time to examine the enormous dossiers that were put forward by the prosecution. Very little has been actually reported in the press on the merits of this particular case. So I think it's very difficult to, also not being a legal scholar, to comment in any concrete way on how convincing the evidence presented is. Probably we have to wait for the reactions of the defense team in how they treat the evidence presented and what counter-arguments they are going to bring forward.
Now, you briefly mentioned freedom of media. What do you think the prosecution of these journalists means for the future of media freedom in Egypt?
Well, if, of course, the verdicts are going to be in line with the demands of the prosecution, then that is a very worrying prospect, of course. That is why I think the eventual outcome of this trial might be quite different from the way political actors, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, have been treated by the judiciary, because I'm very sure that also the judiciary is very much aware that the impact of this verdict goes beyond Egypt itself and has an impact not merely on the internal stability but will affect foreign relations of Egypt, and that might be something that is going to be in the back of the heads of the judges as well.